issue, and it's an interesting problem that I ran into whenever I was at the college. There was a Gremlin in this Buick, and we're going to tell you how this came about. By the way, happy Monday. Hope you guys are going to have a great week. It's going to make a lot of good labor hours, a lot of money, and with no comeback repairs, by the way. And so right now we had AC blowing hot air on this Buick. This Buick was bought for $2,500 used from a local dealership by a foreign exchange student that was over here from Germany. And this is the first thing she wanted straightened out, was that the air conditioner needed to be fixed. But she had a low coolant light message too. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with these kind of low coolant sensors here. These things here will actually turn on the low coolant light even if the antifreeze coolant, if the water in antifreeze concentration is wrong, which is very interesting. It's got a one little single brass probe in here, and it's, sends voltage to it. I never have investigated exactly how these work, but we've had to replace several of them because of low coolant lights. Sometimes, you got to make sure the coolant level as far as the concentration is right, using your refractometer or your little bubble, thing or whatever. But anyway, that right there was giving it a little once over, and we went ahead and replaced the coolant sensor, which worked pretty well. And so what we had, we took care of the low coolant light problem that way. But the AC system didn't have any juice in it at all. Had gone atmospheric, which means there was the same thing inside the pipes as there was outside. There wasn't refrigerant in there at all. So we did 150 pounds of nitrogen gas. You get a nitrogen bottle here, and you hook this adapter up to it, and you're basically putting nitrogen gas in there. Then you close it off and you let it trap the gas, and you look for with your spray bottles with your soap to see it held 30 inches. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a leak, because you got to remember, on the high side the pressure can go up to 300 pounds, particularly in the summer. All you got out here is 14 and a half. So you can pull 30 inches of vacuum, and you've still only got 14 and a half pounds of pressure trying to get in there. And the leak you have may be small enough so that you're not going to notice it by doing a vacuum decay test. However, putting the pressure in it will work. Now this time we didn't find anything that way, because there's always a chance you don't spray the soap bubbles in the right spot. You can't get the soap bubbles onto the evaporator, obviously. And so we went ahead and drew the air out of it, charged it up with refrigerant, put UV dye in it, and I told her, I says, drive this car on the weekend, bring it back on Monday, and we'll see if the refrigerant has leaked out, and we'll look at the dye and see where it went, which is really the best way to do this kind of thing. Alright, so it came back Monday morning. The low coolant message had been joined by a trunk ajar message. Although the low coolant message, I think we had to order that sensor, and we replaced it Monday, and we did take care of that. But the AC's refrigerant charge was gone. We replaced the coolant level sensor. That's, I actually got that out of order in my mind whenever I was building this thing. But the long and the short of it was, the coolant level sensor was handled. The trunk ajar was still there, but that was something that, that's not really a big deal, other than it's annoying words on the message center. And so what we did was, the black light lit up the bottom of the AC compressor like it was radioactive, and we verified that leak with another nitrogen test. We replaced the compressor, the orifice, and the accumulator. We vacked it down, we did the charge, but we had no cold air, and the compressor wouldn't engage. Now what the heck is up with this, Alright, so while we were investigating that, one of my guys noticed that the temperature gauge, we had the engine running while we were checking this, and it was getting close to the red line. He goes, hey, this car is trying to get hot. Well, the fans had never come on. And so, but none of these symptoms were there when we checked it previously. And we had run this thing long enough during that previous visit to the shop the previous week, that none of this, this seems like this would have showed up if it was going to be a problem. But on the weekend, it magically materialized that we had this Gremlin that was working on this thing. And so here we wound up working on the Buick. But we got this Mitsubishi Raider that came in, had a misfire. It had been to 2 other shops. None of them had fixed it. Identifix lists a bevy of possible concerns for misfires on the Raider. One of them was the ignition switch, and one shop that was really a good shop. I was surprised. I knew the guy that ran the shop. They replaced the ignition switch. Another shop replaced an injector, which this person had done, like I'm always saying don't do. Go into one shop, and if you're not satisfied with what happened, even though you paid them, you go to a different shop. That's silly. It doesn't make any sense. Well, all it really needed was a set of spark plugs. These were the originals. So the lesson is, if you find yourself going to Identifix before you do plain old basic diagnostics, you may get misled more often than not. I'm not trashing Identifix, but the long and the short of it is, when we start finding silver, all you got to do is find a few silver bullets on Identifix, and you find yourself jumping in there first, hoping you can knock out this job and without having to do any troubleshooting. That makes your troubleshooting skills get really atrophied, so that you get to where you can't figure out what's wrong with anything. And so it's okay to go to Identifix and ask a lot of mechanics, hey, have you seen this? But start with your basics, just like you would if you had no Identifix. When you run out of ideas, that's when you go to Identifix, and you may or may not find something there even then. Identifix is okay. I would not, though, use Identifix to replace other shop manual stuff. Now, Identifix is kind of pricey too, but they don't have anything and everything you need, or they didn't the last time I looked at it. Somebody else may know, have a better experience with them now than I had whenever I was using it. Well, this Santa Fe came in with the AC blowing hot air. The compressor wouldn't run, the refrigerant charge was good. The dealer had worked on it several times, and according to the guy that owned it, they'd charged him something like a total of $3,000. And he says, if you can't fix this, we're going to trade this in on something else. You know, it was a well-weathered, car they'd been driving a long time, or SUV or whatever. So we pull this code we use the buttons. Control panel access method. Now this is kind of difficult to find even in the shop manual, but you switch the ignition off and on, press the off switch more than 4 times within 2 seconds while pressing the auto switch. You know how this kind of thing goes. All graphics on the display will blink on. The diagnosis starts, continues operation. Anyway, what happened was, when we went through these steps, and you can freeze this and print it if you want to, because it's kind of difficult to find online, we found a open pin thermosensor, which is basically the evaporative temperature sensor, which is there to keep the evaporator from freezing up. And if it malfunctions, then the way this one did, the compressor won't ever run no matter what you do, because it's basically, that sensor is supposed to keep that from turning on from freezing the evaporator up, making it into a block of ice. All right, and so this thing needed an evaporator temperature sensor to get the AC cooling again. It's an 8-hour job. I put this fellow named Lee on it. He got it done, and that's where the sensor was. He had to rip all of that stuff out of the dash, and whenever the thing was cooling and the owner saw that it was working right, and it was only a $29 sensor, of course we didn't charge labor at the college because we're not allowed to, he says, can I give this student a tip? And I said, there's no rule against it. I wouldn't take a tip from you even if you offered it to me, but you can give the student a tip, and I'm not going to say anything to anybody about it. He emptied his wallet into that student's hand. It was $160 worth of $20 bills. It was 8 $20 bills he gave that boy, which was really something. But anyway, I think that's the biggest tip I've ever known about as a college. Usually if somebody might give them $10. And I never suggested that they give a tip either. It had to be totally the customer's on his incentive and all that. That's what I'm trying to say. Well, back to the Buick. The AC clutch doesn't engage. Cooling fans are inoperative. That's dangerous. You can't release a vehicle with the cooling fans not working, because if they burn it up, they're going to blame it on you. And so she had to find another ride. And there's that trunk of jar light, could these problems be related? AC clutch not engaging, cooling fans inoperative. Don't know what the common denominator is, but something's going on. But this one simple problem of the AC not working had been replaced by 2 bigger problems that had to require a lot more troubleshooting. Now, again, I had also talked about these. We worked on a Chevy Blazer one time. I had to pull transmission out and put it back in, whatever, can't remember. Exactly. It had something to do with removing and reinstalling the transmission, or maybe replacing the transmission with another one. And when we went to put that thing back in there, and you could, it was adjusted every way you could adjust it as far as the shift cable. When you put it in park, it might be in park and it might not. And what that means is it could roll away unexpectedly, and that's how people get killed. You know, that guy that it was on that Star Trek movie got killed by his Jeep, and it was a brand new one because it followed him down there and crushed him against the place where his mailbox was because he didn't know it was following him. But I said, you know, we had to keep that one because it was too dangerous to let it go. Because I told them we're going to have to figure out what's wrong with this thing. We put a shift cable on it, and we actually had to replace, before we could get that thing to go in park, I had to take the little shift lever off the transmission shift rail and get one from another transmission. I don't know why, they look just alike, but when we put that on there, it would go in park every single time. Anyway, if that thing won't go in park, don't let it out of your sight. Or if the brakes aren't right, like if you had to take them apart and they want them put back together the way they were, even though they had them wired up with, you know, haywire and all that kind of stuff, you can't put them back together like that and release the vehicle, because if it fails, then you're responsible. So you got to be really careful about what you release. All right, so the trunk ajar message, and well, the switch was operating normally. There wasn't any wiring concerns. We had good voltage on the circuits and all. We moved it to the back burner, so we'll worry about the trunk ajar thing later. I had put a couple of guys working on that, and they went all back there looking, and they came back and reported that they didn't know why the trunk ajar light was on, but it shouldn't be. Okay, so all right, so for the fan, we find the relays, right? Okay, so there's cooling. This is a photo of the actual panel on that vehicle. Okay, coolant fan relay 2, coolant fan relay. You can see how these are set up. There's 3 relays, and one of them they call it coolant fan, the high-speed relay, low-speed relay, and the series parallel relay. Now, I thought this was such an intriguing circuit. It was fairly easy for me to build a board. I built this this board, so whenever you let me get my little pin fired up here. Whenever you turned on this switch, if it was wired up right, the students had to wire it up based on that schematic down there that I gave them, which came from here. Anyway, whenever they turned this switch on, the fans would run at half speed, meaning they were running in series. So each one of them was getting about 6 volts. And when you push this button, they would kick on high speed. But all of this had to be wired up just right. The funny thing about this is, even if a student took a picture of this with his cell phone like he was going to cheat and wire it up the same way, ain't no way you can look at this spaghetti mess that you and I told my students, I says, one wire at a time, make your connections at the right spots, and you'll get this thing wired up right. One student could do it without a schematic in about 3 minutes after he finally got good at it. But anyway, they just loved playing with this thing. It cost me about $150 to build it with these 2 fan motors and little relays and pigtails and all that junk. Well, let's test the fans first. So what are we going to do? How are we going to test the fans? Let's just first look and see how the fans are wired. Whenever you turn on the low-speed fan relay, it basically carries juice through this fan here, and it goes here, and then it comes up here, and it has to go, because that relay is normally closed, is carrying it. It's going through both fans to ground. See, it starts here, goes through this fan, goes to ground. That's why you're running in series. All right, then whenever you turn on this one here, you basically, look what happens now. This is sending power directly, or in other words, it provides a ground directly to this thing here. I should have had this one here green in this case. And this one here, when that one's clicked on, you're actually turning on both those relays when you go to high speed. This one here is getting power directly through here. See? So this one here is getting its ground directly through here. So they're both running on 12 volts. So that's basically the way that works. And so knowing that, you can check both fans with using a very simple step. You can check both fans if you understand that. So you're going to remove coolant fan relay number 1, like right there, and then you take a test light and you connect it to right here. You notice it's hooked right now with things the way they are. You don't even have to have the key on. you can hook this test light from hot to there. This test light will be burning. It'll be shining and all right there. All that little bulb will be lit up. And then this light should be on. All right, you turn this fan motor very slowly and see if that light ever goes off. If that light is off to start with, you start turning the fan motors and see which one makes it come on. Anyway, you turn the fan motor. If it ever goes off, that fan motor's junk. If you then you turn this fan motor, because see that this ground that's burning this light is coming at this point through both of these. See, so if you turn that fan motor and that light winks out, that means you got a dead spot on the commutator, and that means the fan won't run if it stops there. It's like a game of electric roulette, you know. So I've talked about this before, and I've hammered and hammered and hammered on it. So, you know, whether it did you any good or not, I don't know. But I came up with this when I was at the Ford place. I don't know of anybody else that does this other than people I've taught to do it. Now, there may be folks out there, but I came up with this because I had a lot of problem with fans that had intermittent not working issues, and I always found one. If that light ever goes out when you're turning that fan through, it's non-negotiable. That's a go no go test. The fan's junk. All right, so we used the scan tool after we determined both fans were good, and we told the PCM to turn on the fans, and it did. With the engine coolant temperature sensor disconnected, the PCM would run the fans at low speed, which it was supposed to do. See, if it doesn't know what the ECT is, it defaults to running the fans just to make sure everything's okay. Now, the PCM could operate the fans, but it wouldn't turn them on. And so we're thinking, what in the world is going on? All right, so we use a 50,000. I've talked about this before too, but this is extremely useful. It doesn't cost much to do this, and so don't be bashful about it. You take the coolant temperature sensor loose, you connect the two of the legs, just, you know, the center one and either one of the other ones, it doesn't matter which, and you install a 50K pot, turn the knob, and watch the temperature reading on the scan tool. And we did that. We said we're going to make this PCM think this thing is blistering hot. Now this is cool, because you can check the fan this way to see if the PCM will turn it on without ever heating the car up. See what I mean? And that's really useful information. And like I say, you can buy a 50K pot online like this for almost nothing. If you look it up on Amazon, you'd be surprised how cheap they are. You can even build yourself a neat little box if you wanted to with a thing in it. All right. So the PCM would have melted the engine down without ever turning on the fan. And because when we turned this thing up to 267 degrees, the fan never came on. The PCM would not turn the fan on based on engine coolant temperature input. Now, what the heck was that about? And, you know, you couldn't help but think this has got to have something to do with why the AC don't work too. Man, you know, trunk of jar light, I don't know what that's got to do with that, but anyway, so we peek into the data stream. The scan tool showed the control head was sending a request. It showed the BCM was receiving the request, but the BCM wouldn't message the PCM to turn on the AC. It absolutely wouldn't do it. So the BCM got the AC on request from the control head, but it was supposed to tell the PCM, hey, I got a request, and the PCM's responsible for turning on the compressor and the fans and all that kind of stuff. Of course, the PCM also turns on the, you know, condenser fan when the AC is on too. Okay, so this is a class 2 message transfer between modules, and it's kind of hard to track that with anything but a scan tool. You can't do it with a scope. You can't do it with voltmeter. You've got to have a scan tool to peek in there and see what the engine controller and the BCM are seeing and what they're doing with it. Okay, let's simplify that and get rid of all those extra nonsense. I like to do that with these schematics, because whenever you have all of that stuff on the screen, it's kind of, you lose track in all of the numbers and all. So I remove the circuit numbers and all this stuff, and you get a clearer example of the way this thing works. Now, we're going to simplify that schematic. Now let's go a step farther and add what's the additional. Let's add the additional stuff that's part of this schematic as relates to the air conditioner. There we go. We got more there now. Now then, we added more information here. You see the control head up there. See the control head and the HVAC programmer. All right, and this is how it's supposed to work. Okay, is it a PCM software issue? We cleared the memory, no joy. Reflashed the PCM to the latest calibration, no joy. I used a tool that I got from Joey Henrich at aetools.us for that. Incidentally, Joey Henrich is a tremendously good place to buy your scan tools and scopes and stuff, because once you buy stuff from him, unless his policy has changed, you get free technical support forever. And anybody that has worked on a lot of different cars that have a lot of different kinds of passive theft and all, Joey Henrich can do stuff that nobody else in the country can do. I have known of Chrysler running out of ideas on how to fix a vehicle that was a platform that was 2 or 3 years older, and they would send them to Joey, and he would figure it out and fix it, because he's that sharp. aetools.us. Check that out. All right. He didn't pay me. He didn't pay me to say that, by the way. Well, Identifix was our next stop. I didn't notice any silver bullets in that set of posts. Some shot in the dark said, well, you might think about a BCM and all that kind of stuff. I said, well, let's think about the BCM. All right, with the PCM eliminated, the BCM seems to be the next major player. But the programmer doesn't see, the HVAC programmer doesn't communicate directly with the PCM. It has to go through the BCM, and this is how it works. Okay, so the control head asks for AC to the HV programmer. The programmer, which is weird that they call this the programmer, that big huge box under the dash on the right side of a 71 Eldorado is called a programmer, and it's as big as a barn. But anyway, this little box right here then sends a request to the BCM. But this BCM said, I got your request for AC, but I decided to be a jerk and not send it to the PCM, and I will allow the PCM no cooling fan operation either. Boo boo. So this is basically what was going on, as far as I could tell. Well, a new BCM from GM was $400. From the salvage yard, it was $45. And so I said, I called the salvage yard. It was on the way home from between my house and the college, and they said, sure, we got one of those. All right, so I go over there and I pick it up. I picked up the part at the salvage yard. I paid for it, and I plugged it in. No joy. Didn't have anything different. But I said, I wonder, these two boxes are just alike under here. I checked the part number. They gave me the wrong dadgum part. When these guys are up under the dash pulling those things, it's understandable that, the law of averages, Murphy's Law, is that if there's two choices you can make and only one of them's right, you're going to make the wrong one the first time. And if you're not really familiar with this, you won't realize, see, they even made the connectors different. The programmer's got blue connector, and this has got a pink one. Now, this is very confusing even to the people that drew these manuals, because if you look this picture up in the 98 Park Avenue, you're going to find out that it even says that this box right here on this side. Furthermore, you don't realize which way you're looking, But anyway, it says this part right here, this one here, it'll tell you this here is the programmer, but it's not. This is the BCM. And it tells you this back here is the BCM. Now, on this drawing, I had to fix that, but that's how they messed up. Okay, so these boxes mounted on both sides of the same bracket. It's easy for the salvage yard to make that mistake. I plugged the BCM into the Buick. Everything came online. Everything was fixed. The AC worked. The coolant fans began to operate normally. The trunk jar warning light went away and replaced by change oil soon. So this was basically the root cause of this was the BCM. Now, why it failed over the weekend, it was working just fine when it left the shop and it came back not working. See, if she'd have driven that thing, the coolant fans failed over the weekend and she burned it up, she would have tried to act like it was something we did, which is really dicey and dangerous. Well, somebody had probably had this trouble intermittently. I noticed that this relay right here had been replaced. See, it wasn't the same as, it would look just like all the other unless somebody had replaced it. So somebody was trying to fix this by just popping a relay in it. Usually that doesn't work. Not that it never works, but usually it doesn't. It's just easy to do. So they traded the car in and they let somebody else deal with it. Probably didn't even tell them when they traded it in that it was giving this problem. The owner of the car had only bought it a couple of weeks earlier, and the dealer that sold it probably didn't even know that this problem was on this car. It had one more curveball left in it. She wanted the brakes done because of pedal pulsation. So we took care of that. The AC was fixed, the oil was changed, the brakes were done. There were no warning messages, but 2 weeks later she came back and it said the transmission had harsh 2, 3, and 3/4 shifts, and it would stall sometimes during parking lot maneuvers, and the mill was on, and it had a mass airflow code that we hadn't previously seen. But what's that got to do with the transmission? You know, I'm thinking, well, that's interesting there. Well, when a MAF issue feels like a transmission problem, I had seen this on an Oldsmobile. This guy brought his wife's Oldsmobile in, and he said she thought she had messed up the transmission because she had put it in park while it was still rolling, and it seemed like after that the transmission didn't shift right, and so we basically found a mass airflow sensor problem on that one and replaced the mass airflow sensor and fixed that. Well, the readings on this one were lower than they should have been according to what GM published in their shop manual. So we got a $200 mass airflow sensor from the parts store. Be careful if you're not getting a Delco one, because sometimes, even though the Hertz reading may be right, it won't like an aftermarket white box mass airflow sensor. So you got to be careful. If you put a mass airflow sensor on there that's some other brand and it still doesn't work right, you know, you need to go ahead and unplug the mat and try a Delco, because I've run into that before, and it'll beat you up. You can look at it and all the readings look right, but it's still got a check engine light on, or whatever engine light. Okay, so the transmission cleaned up its act. It didn't stall anymore. All it required for that was a mass airflow sensor, and that took care of that whole problem. Alright, well, this has been a wild ride. I hope you guys enjoyed it and got something out of it. Granted, this is a 98 model car. Think about how old that is. But even back then, there were enough electronic modules talking to each other on those vehicles to where it could smack you around one way or another. Y'all have a good week, and hey, let's be careful out there.